Good afternoon and welcome to today's bill hearings of the House Health and Government Operations Committee. This is a virtual committee meeting, as you can see, so I ask your patience if we encounter any technological or streaming issues. This bill hearing is being streamed on Maryland General Assembly's YouTube channel. Remember, even though we're meeting on Zoom, please adhere to our committee rules of one question and one answer from the panel, not one question and one answer from each individual panelist. And you may follow up with a short follow-up question when necessary. Please keep your questions shorter than the expected answer. The bill sponsor or designee is allotted 5 minutes to present the bill. Up to 5 witnesses will each be allowed to speak for 2 minutes in support. And we ask those folks to stay in the hearing until delegates have had an opportunity to ask questions. Next, up to 5 witnesses will be called, and each will be allowed to speak for 2 minutes in opposition and then respond to questions. Madam Chair, did you want to make a comment at this point? Okay. Then we will start, and I would ask that speakers please conclude your remarks when you see the timer finish. We are starting today with House Bill 308, sponsored by Delegate Learman, and this is Comptroller Online Payment Processing Portal. Delegate Learman, welcome to HGO.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here. I appreciate you all taking the time to review this legislation. I am, for the record, Delegate Brooke Learman, presenting HB 308. Over the years, I have worked with, as I'm sure many of you have, many nonprofits and companies in my district and elsewhere to make sure that they are being paid. Just after the pandemic hit, one nonprofit in my district reached out and said that they were having a tough time figuring out why they had not been paid for services rendered through the state and through a state contract. I've had workforce training centers in my district reach out and more. Well, this fall, Senator Cheryl Kagan, who is the co-chair of the Next Generation 911 Commission, also reached out to me because several direct 911 center directors and vendors had shared that they were experiencing significant payment delays, a lack of transparency, and inadequate communication on when they would be paid. So Senator Kagan, as co-chair and working with the 911 Commission, that 911 Commission developed a recommendation to make sure that the state was paying our vendors in a way that was transparent so that people could follow the money and see when they were being paid. So this bill, we reached out to the Comptroller's Office and as well as to DGS and the Department of Information Technology and DBM and worked with them to develop legislation to make additional requirements on how the system's notifying payees or potential payees. This bill simply requires the Comptroller's Office to maintain an online payment processing portal to track money owed to nonprofits, corporations, local governments doing business with the state. The Comptroller's Office would consult with the Department of Information Technology on design, development, implementation, and more. The online payment processing portal that we'd like to see will notify a payee when required documents are received, notify a payee when its request for payment is under review, approved for payment, and more, provide the work name, the name, the work email address, the work telephone number of the individual who's responsible for reviewing and approving a payment. As we all know, it can sometimes be daunting and difficult to find that person in state government who you can talk to. And it would also allow the public to search payments made to a payee using the name and address for the payee so that members of the public can see where money is going. Well, late last week, we heard from, after we had previous discussions with the Comptroller's Office, but late last week, we heard from the Comptroller's Office that they are in fact working on a system to do this, which is very exciting. And they have a system now, but they need to update it and they are working to update it. We believe that what they're doing is right, that we need to modernize the way that we do business in the state for our for-profit and nonprofit companies. I believe that they've acknowledged the insufficiency of the current system and they started working on a concept similar to what we've developed. their new portal and the new concept they're working on is absolutely a step in the right direction. But we think that this bill continues to be necessary to bring in several additional components to what they're already envisioning. First, people need to have the ability, and this system should have the ability to send push notifications so that payees have more information about where their payment is in the process. We also believe that it's imperative to provide a point of contact, not home information, but work information for the individual responsible for reviewing and approving the payments. And finally, there needs to be some way that this system can integrate with Mbe, which is the contracting portal for awarding contracts in the states. And right now, as you'll see in the comptroller's letter of information, there are no fewer than 3 separate systems. There's Mbe, this new system the comptroller is creating, and the Maryland Transparency Portal. And we need to think through how we can integrate these systems better. So there's really one portal where both members of the public and payees can go to get information on contracts. So, residents and businesses are accustomed to and deserve high levels of communication and customer service, and vendors should have the ability to easily track where their payments are from the state and be able to intervene if they need additional information, have questions or concerns. I believe that this bill will really make Maryland a better place to do business for all types of business. And I request a favorable report on HB 308. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. And we'll hear from 2 more supporters before we go to questions. So I'd like to call on Henry Bogdan, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, my name is Henry Bogdan, speaking for Maryland Nonprofits, an association of over 1,300 nonprofit organizations and institutions around the state. We're here in support of House Bill 308. We have a bill coming up after this on payment, but the issues are basically the same. Nonprofits, some of them have formal procurement contracts. Most of them work on grant agreements. They are reimbursable contracts, but they're not procurement contracts. They do the work, they submit an invoice. Then they may or may not find out when that invoice is sufficient or insufficient. They may have to follow up to find out if their invoice was received. If their invoice isn't paid, they try to find out why. There is no easy way to find out why. I know there will be testimony or written testimony with examples of this. Payments can be delayed because an agency feels that there's some slippage somewhere on another bill. You may owe something, and they put a hold on your payment on this grant, and then you have trouble finding out why there's a hold. You won't automatically get notified. You'll try to deal with the comptroller. The comptroller will tell you, well, we don't have the invoice. You can get caught in the switches between the agency and the comptroller. We've talked to the comptroller. I talked to the comptroller's office last week. They say they pay invoices within 5 business days of receipt in 90% of cases, and that's during the pandemic. The problem is, when do they have a good invoice? And that communication back and forth, there's simply no way to find that answer. So that's why we're supporting 308, which would actually create the answer, and that would be great. Thank you, and we urge approval.
Thank you, Mr. Bogdan. Robin McKinney.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to submit testimony in support of House Bill 308. This bill allows state vendors to better track their invoices and payments. My name is Robin McKinney. I'm the CEO and co-founder of the CASH campaign of Maryland. CASH promotes economic advancement for low to moderate income individuals and families in Baltimore and across Maryland. More than half of the folks we work with earn less than $20,000. CASH has very diversified funding sources, so we receive both federal and state funding that flows through state agencies, academic institutions, as well as nonprofit intermediaries. After we submit an initial invoice, it can take anywhere from 30 days to more than 6 months to get paid. And all of these are reimbursements where cash has to literally float the money until we get paid. Unfortunately, even when we get a payment amount, it can be inconsistent with the invoice amount. And a lot of this has to do with undisclosed offset liabilities. In the last 18 months, cash has had multiple offset liabilities that were never listed on the General Accounting Division's website through the Comptroller's Office, which is part of the current system. It could also not be viewed by individual institutions, and it took me more than 18 months to unravel all of the different issues that were happening. We had over $70,000 of funds held for almost 6 months over less than $300. Another $230,000 was held up over $15.88. That $15.88 became an offset that was booked in June of 2020, but was not sent to cash as a bill until October of 2021 by the Department of Labor. We were routinely told by the Comptroller's Office that these funds should not have been held up for these insignificant liability issues, but it still took many, many hours of my life and my staff's life to try to get these issues resolved. Vendors have a right to track where their payments are in the process and be able to intervene if additional information is needed. For these reasons, we encourage a favorable report on HB 308.
Thank you very much, Ms. McKenney. I will open it for questions from the committee. Delegate Rosenberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Delegate Lehrman, the fiscal note, as you're probably aware, says that it would cost tens of millions of dollars to upgrade existing financial management and procurement systems. What is your view of that note? How should we try and get the note down?
Yep. No, it's a great
recognizing, wait a second, I got a punchline. Recognizing that you may be in a unique position to address the fiscal note.
Thank you for that question. Thank you for that question, Delegate. Fortunately, the Comptroller's Office is already working on a system to do much of what we want to do. And so I don't believe that the fiscal, and we will go back and work with the Comptroller's Office on the fiscal note to make sure that it's clear to the fiscal note author that much of the work that we're looking at is already being done. We will go in and send some amendments to the committee to make it clear that because the Comptroller's Office is working on creating a system like this, we don't think there needs to be a duplicative system. Rather, there are a few tweaks to the system that's being created that we want the Comptroller's Office to keep in mind. So I believe that that will help, if not completely eliminate, certainly bring way down the issue of the fiscal note. Thank you.
Thank you.
Delegate Bandari.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Delegate Lehrman, for the bill. I'm not sure if you're aware of Comptroller suggested language to exclude state employees' pay data and exclude financial history or activities of an individual. And the Comptroller Office is suggesting to include a listing of which government entities' payment data should be included in the portal.
Thank you for that. So I think there is some misunderstanding. The Comptroller's Office seems to think that what we want are home numbers for state employees, which is not in the bill. We in the bill believe that this system should include contact information, work contact information for the individuals who are processing these and who can be the point of contact for these payments to be processed. I haven't seen, I don't know if I've seen the second amendment or second suggestion, but certainly on the contact information, we are absolutely not requesting home contact information, and it doesn't say that in the bill, it's just work contact information.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Delegate Saab.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My question is, can the Comptroller do what this bill is suggesting now without a bill? Do they have the ability and the authority and the funds?
So right now they are creating the system, which we just found out last week, even though we had conversations with others in the Comptroller's Office earlier. Other people in the comptroller's office didn't know that they were creating this new system. So last week we found out that they are creating and updating this new system. And so our request, we will put in an amendment to the bill to make sure that the things that we are asking for will be included. Could they do that without a bill? They probably could. Could many of the agencies do things without bills that we put in? Probably. But we want to make sure that it happens, which is why we're continuing to work with their office on this. You're on
Delegate
mute.
Saab, you're on mute.
Thank you. I think you are in a unique situation. I mean, a lot of us, we always prefer that we can fix things with the agencies without having to go to legislation. And it is just what Delegate Rosenberg alluded, that you might be in a position that you can do what you want to do. And my only fear with this one, would it, and you can answer this question probably best, would it create less flexibility having this legislation in place? And would it tie the hands of the next comptroller, which potentially could be yourself?
Right. So I will say, I think that what we want, when we put in the amendments for this bill, the 3 tweaks that we want to the bill are pretty general and pretty basic. And I don't think that they will tie the hands of whoever the next comptroller is. I think they're just sort of fundamental transparency measures, right? When you have a business in your district who needs to be paid, they can call you, or they should just be able to look online and figure out what's going on and pick up the phone and see who that they can call to talk to about this bill. They should be able to follow the payment, right, from when they submit the invoice to when they get that check or that direct deposit. And if there's a hiccup somewhere along the way, like there has been, as you just heard some testimony about, and like many of the 911 centers found there was, if there's a hiccup along the way, we want to make it as easy as possible for businesses and nonprofits to remedy that hiccup. And so I think that the suggestions that we're changing to what the comptroller's office is currently doing are minor, but are important. And I don't think that they will be so onerous that the next comptroller or the comptroller's office now will find them in any way overbearing.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I appreciate you bringing this to us. Thank you.
Thank you,
Deb.
Delegate.
Okay. Seeing no other questions and no further speakers, this concludes the hearing on House Bill 308. Thank you, Delegate Learman. And we'll move to House Bill 325, Delegate Barnes. This is state and local procurement payment practices. Welcome to HGO, Delegate Barnes.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the Health and Government Operation Committee. For the record, my name is Delegate Darrell Barnes out of Prince George's County. House Bill 325 as amended will shorten the time frame within state agencies to make payment under procurement contracts from 30 days to 15 days. During the pandemic, small businesses took a big hit, and we are still in recovery mode. The bill protects and supports the financial interests of small businesses so that they can strive right here in Maryland. This is particularly of importance of small businesses who may not have a large line of credit and depend on timely payment of invoices. The bill will offer an opportunity to streamline and expedite the invoice payment to small businesses. Our neighboring jurisdictions are able to pay within 15 days. This is merely a proactive step in helping to meet the needs of our small businesses to assist them in building a positive relationship within the state of Maryland. It is our aim to continue to do what we can to support the financial stability of small businesses that need help during these unprecedented times. Passing this legislation will allow the small business community to be compensated for state projects they complete in a timely manner. The bill would improve the integrity of contract relationships across the state of Maryland and support the financial interest of our small business community. And for these reasons, I ask for a favorable report.
Thank you, Delegate. Delegate, is there someone that you would like to dedicate or cede the rest of your time to, or we'll split it up with your panel?
We'll split it up amongst my panel.
Okay, thank you. Then I'd like to call on Ike Casey.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm Ike Casey, the Executive Director of the American Subcontractors Association. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Thank you. The American ASA of Metro Washington, and I'm also speaking for ACE, the Alliance for Construction Excellence, which includes about 1,200 construction subcontractors, and there are approximately 57,000 employees. This group of associations does a lot of construction in Maryland. But there are those that need this bill very, very badly. So construction subcontractors finance state construction. Now, what do I mean by that? When the job is bid, the subcontractor has to bid the job, pay the employees, buy the materials, go to work, and then maybe in 15 days, if this bill passes, the state will pay the general contractor, and then in 7 days, the general contractor will pay the subcontractor. So the subcontractor's out of money for about usually 45 to 90 days before they get their first payment. Now, this prevents many small, particularly women and minority contractors, construction subcontractors, from being successful because they don't have the legacy financing to be able to do contracting like this. They've got to be able to finance the job for 60 to 90 days, and they can't do that. And so I hope you will pass this bill. It's very much in the interest of the construction subcontractors throughout the state of Maryland, and it'll make a big difference. In my last 10 seconds, we also support 308, and thank you for introducing that.
Thank you, Mr. Casey. Mr. Bruce Spariano.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be before you. Also, on behalf of ACE, Mr. Casey just spoke. I'm not going to repeat everything he said, but we so strongly support Delegate Darrell Barnes' legislation. This legislation's been in for several years, and the time is now. Unfortunately, the pandemic has shown that businesses struggle. Everyone in business relies on cash flow. As Mr. Casey indicated, the subcontractors a lot of times front the money and they bank it, and they have to get paid so that they can go on to the next job. This is a critically important, modest change in the law to guarantee much more prompt payment, as has been articulated by the sponsor of the bill. We would urge a favorable report this session of this legislation. Respectfully, its time has come. Thank you very much. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Champ McCullough.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Champ McCullough on behalf of the Maryland Associated General Contractors, in support of the bill, and in the interest of time, I would simply adopt the remarks that Mr. Casey made. The dialogue that took place on the prior bill is illuminating. There is a solution available. The cost of it is uncertain, but it is a one-time cost to put in place an accounting system and payment process that meets the needs, especially, as has been pointed out, of small minority women-owned businesses. It would be a wasted opportunity not to pass this bill, not to take advantage of technology that could be put in place, and recognize, yes, there is an expense of additional personnel. But if you compare the additional expense, let's suppose the fiscal note is right, and let's suppose it is about $7 million a year. How does that compare to the billions of dollars that the state spends every year? It is a fractional additional cost with significant benefits to a wide range of your constituents. This is a golden opportunity to do the right thing. And I would respectfully urge the committee to give the bill a favorable report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. I'd like to call Stephanie Bagley, please.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the House and Government Affairs Committee. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Very good. My name is Stephanie Bagley. I'm the founder and president of SCB Management Solutions, Inc. Thank you for the opportunity to submit this testimony in support of House Bill 325, previously introduced as House Bill 454, for which I submitted testimony. Throughout my testimony, I will refer to my company as SCB. SCB was founded in 2016 and has been a Maryland certified minority and woman-owned business enterprise since 2018. We are a management consulting firm helping public and private sector organizations transform and modernize their technology and processes. We currently have subcontracting and direct contracting with the state of Maryland and local jurisdictions. We've been quite fortunate despite COVID. We realized a 100% revenue increase from 2020 to 2021 and signed some of our largest long-term contracts. As much as that is a blessing, it has also created a significant strain on our working capital. We are paid on average 45 to 60 days or more after issuing an invoice. We have to pay our employees every 15 days. Therefore, we pay our primary costs 60 to 75 or more days before we are paid. This erosion of working capital is a significant risk to our company, and we are not alone. According to SCORE, the mentoring arm of the SBA, of the small businesses that fail, 82% attribute their failure to cash flow problems. SCB created 6 new jobs in 2021. We need to hire more. However, I am very cautious because of cash flow. House Bill 325 is a long-term solution for small business sustainability and growth. I respectfully request your favorable support of House Bill 325. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And the last member of this panel is Wayne Frazier. Is Mr. Frazier here?
I don't think he's here.
Oh, okay. Okay, then that concludes the favorable panel, and I will open it up to questions from the committee. And I'll begin with Delegate Krebs.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And first of all, I appreciate and recognize the problem that we're trying to solve here. It's definitely a problem. The question I have, and I'm not sure who here is to answer it, but it seems like this is a workflow problem for state agencies, because no matter what, they're handling the same amount of invoices, whether we shorten the time or not shorten the time. And somehow someone's got to be accountable for this workflow problem in these agencies. So the question I have, changing this, I don't see how it's going to change it. They got to manage their employees better and their schedule. So has this become more of a problem because of COVID and people working remotely and just those types of things? Or is this, I mean, what exactly, I'm trying to figure out how this would solve the problem, which definitely is a problem. And there's no one here from local government. They all signed up a poster, but they didn't really let us know why they're having these difficulties. So maybe somebody that did testify can let us know if it's COVID related or it predates that.
But Delegate, let me start by saying that this problem has been going on for many, many years. This is the 3rd year in which I'm bringing this bill pre-COVID. So listen, if anything this pandemic has shown is that more businesses will be able to keep their doors open only if they were able to get paid on time. So this is a problem. You know, the bill has been amended to remove municipalities and local government, which MML and MACO have now said that they are favorable with the bill with amendments. The bill would not cost as much money because it is unlikely that the impact will increase by millions of dollars as the state can function per your report. With the staff that they already have in place. Listen, if the Washington, D.C. can pay in 15 days and the federal government can pay in 15 days, then I just believe that it's high time that the state of Maryland follows suit and pay in 15 days. As you have heard by the folks that have testified, there are hundreds of thousands of businesses here in the state of Maryland that are getting paid in 60 and sometimes 90 days. That's just unacceptable. And I think in the year 2020, I believe it's our time to do the right thing and make sure that our small businesses are paid for the work that they have done and by submitting their invoices and getting paid on time.
Thank you. Follow-up question, Madam Chair.
Sure.
And I agree with everything you just said, but Ms. Bagley just testified that she's getting paid 45 to 60 days afterwards, and we have a rule now that says 30. So they're not meeting the 30 currently. So how is changing it to 15 going to fix it when they're not meeting the current 30? That's just a question again for the administrative staff to, something's got to change about workflow, because they're not going to, it's not going to change the number of contracts that they're dealing with. It's just going to change how they have the staff up to deal with this. But I definitely thank you for bringing this to our attention, and it's a problem that needs to be solved in some way or another. Thank you.
Okay.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
Wayne Fraser just came on if he's allowed to give us testimony.
Okay, Mr. Frazier, we'll let you go. You'll have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Wayne Frazier, president of the Maryland Washington Minority Companies Association in Baltimore. We've been around since 2001, and we advocate for inclusion for women and minority businesses in Maryland. And payment or waiting for payment has been the #1 issue since the beginning of time. Now is the time to change that, reducing it to 15 days that will flow down to all of the municipalities, the counties, and particularly Baltimore City, which is horrendous when it comes to making payments. Just last year, on water projects that are funded by the state that flows through the city's procurement, contractors are waiting up to 6 months to get paid. That's ridiculous. And then when the invoices were submitted, there was issues on chargebacks. I don't know if this bill will correct that, but the contractors need to get paid in a much quicker fashion and not rely on their own cash flow or lack of to fund. Because remember, if they default, if they cannot pay their subs or their workers or their equipment, then they can be defaulted out of the project and charged back. That is an awful, awful penalty to pay for not being paid on time. I support this bill, and I hope that you take action this session to make it better. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frazier. Okay, I would like to move to the unfavorable panel, which includes Justin Fiore.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, committee members. My name is Justin Fiore here on behalf of Maryland Municipal League in opposition to House Bill 325 as it was filed. I want to thank the sponsor for reaching out to us and meeting with us during the interim. We've shared a number of good conversations. I want to thank them for hearing our concerns and trying to find a win-win on this solution. And ultimately for pulling us out of the bill to focus on state procurement this year. As you mentioned, we would certainly drop our opposition with his amendment. And thank you for your time.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Fiore? Seeing none, we do have a speaker with favorable with amendment, and that's Denise Tyler, please. Is Ms. Tyler here, Richard? No?
I don't see her.
Okay. Okay, then since she's not here, and Steve, Delegate Johnson, you have a question.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you for bringing this bill, Delegate. After it took me a little bit to look through the bill and look over the letters of in favor and opposition, and anybody that's best to answer this question, is this mostly an issue with municipalities and counties, or is this mostly a state issue? How big of a problem are we having with the municipalities? We did hear testimony about Baltimore City, but how big of an issue are we having with the municipalities and the counties?
So I'm going to ask Mr. Fiore to address that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the sponsor might have some opinions as well, but in our conversations I know he's had concerns with maybe some counties, and it's something that can happen across government, but generally our folks are very good about being on time with payments outside of issues with invoices.
All right, thank you. Delegate Sample Hughes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Delegate, for the bill. I know this is one you've been talking about for a long time because of the necessity to ensure that our businesses are able to keep working. This kind of touches on the question that was just raised from Delegate Johnson, but I want to just take it a little bit further. Mr. Fiore, did I say your name wrong? If so, I apologize. But you were saying that now you're in favor of this bill and starting with state agencies, but will you take this back to the membership of MML and set the framework for any improvements that can be done in the same vein of the same concern that is here at the table today? And so I'm just curious as to where you're going to go from here, because I know you say today we're talking about the state process, but I want to ensure that while we are aware that it is a concern in municipalities, that there will be some work working towards that end.
Yes, and thank you for the question. I fully expect to continue this conversation, especially with the delegate. I think he's made clear that this is a bill this year for the state, and that we're going to continue to find ways that we can speed things up in municipalities. So whether that's MML being a good resource for the members in terms of sharing policies and stories that are working through our summer or winter conference, just general idea sharing and best practices, we might be able to make some headway. But we're also open to continuing conversations around, law and bills in the future. So all on the table.
Okay, thank you. I think a proactive measure would be good. Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, may I offer a comment, Champ McCulloch?
We actually just take one comment from in response to a question from the panel. So I'm going to move to Delegate Salega. And Delegate, if you'd like to ask Mr. McCulloch something, that's fine.
I had two questions. And my first is to Mr. McCulloch for your comment that you had right on the tip of your tongue.
Thank you. I just want to point out that the problem certainly has, it is a serious problem at the state. It is a very serious problem at the county and municipal level. We have contractors who have waited for over 2 years for payment from a large municipality and decided as a result that their company would never do business again with that particular municipality.
That's right.
We've had similar problems with, to name a specific project, the Patuxent wastewater project. Again, contractors have waited year and a half, pushing 2 years for payment. So it is a very serious problem at the municipal and county level. Since they're going to be removed from the bill, that problem will simply exist. Hopefully, if the state comes forward and is able to shorten its payment period, the counties and municipalities will have a good model to look to and to adopt to solve the problem at their level as well.
Thank you. My other question was about the bill states that it is the policy, this is current language, of the state to make payment under a procurement contract within 30 days after the day in which the payment becomes due. So just so we understand, contractor sends bill to state, it's due on March 1st. And it's due on March 1st. You don't send them the invoice on March 1st. Obviously, when you're contracting, you have a bid, you get your bid together, you put your bills in, the job starts, so March 1st. So you're already in law, the law is already giving grace of 30 days before the state has to pay you. This is just shortening it up to 15. So, do you have any hope? They obviously are taking much longer than 30 days right now. So do you have, one, hope that they'll fix it? And two, are you able to collect interest currently, or do we need this bill? I see it's 9%, and whomever is best to answer that question, reminding I'd like to hear from all of you, but our committee only allows one of you to answer my question.
I'll answer it. And thank you
Okay.
for the question, Delegate. You're in the construction world. So you understand by the time you submit your invoice, and even though it may say 30 days, it is still taking 45, sometimes 90 days to get paid. And I just think that is hurting our small businesses here in the state of Maryland. If we can shorten that time frame, once again, not to be redundant, I just think it gives hope to these small businesses to be able to continue to thrive, continue to be the economic engine that they are for the state of Maryland, and continue to employ from within. So the time frame, shorten the time frame helps. I think it's a policy issue that has to be mandated from us in order to have the states regulate those things so we can get paid.
Thank you. Great bill. Thanks so much. I'm sorry I have to leave. I have a bill hearing, but I want to hear the rest of this.
Thank you, Delegate. Delegate Saab, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you, Delegate Barnes. Matter of fact, I think you're too nice of a guy to actually remove MML and the municipalities, because I think it is a problem. And a lot of businesses, like your panel testified on, that they have to pay every 2 weeks, and sometimes you run into cash flow. One of the biggest challenges with small business is cash flow. And I think when you take on these big contracts, you still have to pay these high paying jobs. The question is that I have for MML, and I know you've been taken out of the bill, but what is the issue that you see in your municipalities that it's causing the payments not to be paid on time? And also, is MACO still opposed to the bill? And I know there's an opposition letter from St. Mary Commissioner. They just didn't say why. They just said they're opposed. So if you can touch on that, and you and I can talk offline also on that. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Delegate. Certainly happy to continue our conversation offline. But to your question about where our members have shared concerns with the bills and not meeting timelines, for the most part, the feedback I've gotten when taking this to our legislative committee or working with different finance departments is that they are, by and large, paying on time or even earlier. Where we can run into issues is during large projects and inventories where different departments are involved. So it might be a construction project that goes through multiple departments. You have someone at the supervisor level who's on vacation, and all of a sudden a project that has to be verified with engineers on site takes a little bit longer than the prescribed days, and then we're paying interest on that. But by and large, that's a very small percentage of projects from what I'm being told by our members. And we're happy to look at addressing it.
I appreciate it. I mean, obviously there's a problem. And if someone taking a vacation, that's not, that's not an excuse. I mean, they should find someone else, but happy to talk to you more about it. And then we'll work with the delegate on finding a solution. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Delegate Saab. Seeing no other questions from the committee, that completes the hearing on House Bill 325. Thank you, Delegate Barnes. We'll move to House Bill 451, sponsored by Delegate Stein, State Finance and Procurement, Grants, Prompt Payment Requirement. Seems to be a theme in the bills today. Delegate Stein, welcome to HGO.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. And yes, this is continuation of a theme that builds on the prior discussion about prompt payment for for-profit enterprises, especially small businesses. This bill is designed to ensure that payment terms for nonprofits under state grants align with what small businesses currently have for procurement contracts. And we all know that nonprofits provide a wide range of services under grant agreements with the state. And just like small businesses, nonprofits have to pay attention to cash flow and finances, and are affected just in the same way that small businesses are by late payments under grants and contracts. A recent survey of over 700 nonprofits found that almost half had less than 60 days cash reserve, and a third had less than 30 days. So under current law, as you know, state procurement contracts are required to be paid promptly within 30 days. This is a practice that goes back to the 1980s. Unfortunately, there was no provision for the timing of payment of state grants. And also there are parameters for procurement invoicing, but there was nothing in statute or regulation regarding the invoice process for state grant agreements. So at the request of the Maryland Efficient Grant Application Council, which was established in 2020 to create a common application for grants, this bill would require payment parity for small businesses and nonprofits based on the current provisions in law for procurement contracts. So we believe that nonprofits should have access to the same payment terms as is currently the law for small businesses. And that is what this bill would do. Thank you very much, and be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Delegate. I'm going to call the favorable panel, and then we'll have questions. We'll start with Henry Bogdan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, again, Henry Bogdan from Maryland Nonprofits. This is a continuation of a theme. We know we have a prompt payment law. It's been there since at least the 80s when we started recodifying. This committee helped pass the creation of the Mega Council to review the state's grant processes and standardize them. You also passed the first statute even applying to state grants back in 2018 when we mandated at least some allowance for overhead costs. There is no provision in law or regulation about prompt payment on state grants, and state grants are not, these are reimbursable contracts as a practical matter. You get approval, you start the work, you invoice, you're supposed to get paid. Invoicing might be monthly or quarterly. On quarterly invoicing for small grants, that's absolutely critical you be paid. I mean, small organizations cannot afford to carry the costs of salaries and equipment for 6 months. Unfortunately, you'll hear testimony on this. I just want to stress, we understand that, you have issues with a 15-day rule or questions about that, or should it be 30 or 15 for regular contractors. Nonprofits would be happy to accept payments in 45 days or even more. That would be an improvement for many of them. Now, there is a fiscal note on this bill. If there are questions about that, I'd be happy to address our view on them. I can only say that we know that some of these agencies, especially in human services, may be understaffed. We know there's lack of standardization. There are a lot of inefficiencies. The Mega Council is charged to try to rectify that by standardizing processes, but that's going to take years. This, we think, needs to be done now. The resources are here. If we're talking a handful of staff and agencies, it's certainly worth it to straighten this process out.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Bogdan. Adrian Bridenstine, please.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Adrienne Bridenstine. I'm with Behavioral Health System Baltimore. We are one of the nonprofits that are currently experiencing significantly delayed payments and would stand to benefit if you pass this bill. For those who aren't familiar with us, BHSB is a nonprofit that serves as the local behavioral health authority in Baltimore City. In that role, we oversee that full range of mental health and substance use services, but we are also a significant funder of behavioral health services within our community. We fund services that aren't reimbursable through Medicaid. So those are peer support services, overdose prevention services, harm reduction services, suicide prevention services, all of which are supported with grant dollars that we receive from the state. Majority of our funding is grant dollars from the state. And for the past year, we have been experiencing significant delays in payment for invoices submitted to the Maryland Department of Health. To date, currently, MDH owes us around $11 million. This is creating already today in our community significant disruption in services for our wellness services in particular. We have heard from providers who are not able to make payroll. We even know of one provider in Baltimore City who has to now go out and get a loan, and this affects their nonprofit credit. So this delay in payment is significant, causing significant disruption in services. We as a nonprofit do not have the ability to float dollars to these organizations. We cannot have a cash reserve. That's part of our business of being a nonprofit, and it's part of what we need to do when we accept grant dollars. That is why this prompt payment bill is so incredibly important. And we think it's needed now, probably yesterday, but to hold our state agencies accountable to the communities that they're here to serve. And we just urge in favorable report of this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Robert Malone, please.
Good afternoon. Greetings, everyone. To the chair, the committee, thank you for this opportunity. I'm Rob Malone. I'm the executive director for the ARC in Prince George's County. I'm also the founder of Community Youth Advance. I also serve on the Maryland Efficient Grant Application Council, and I've been on that committee for the past year. And this bill, House Bill 451, is one of the outputs of that committee. The state of Maryland contracts with organizations to provide a variety of key services, including academic enrichment for vulnerable children, temporary housing for the homeless, mental health services, substance abuse services, and so on. I have seen an agency suffer payment delays of over 9 months. And these nonprofits don't typically have the cash to carry that. So should they be responsible for carrying the float when there is a delay in payment of services already provided? Nonprofits run by people of color have 76% less in capital and assets than white-led nonprofit organizations, a mirror image of how wealth has been distributed in this country. So which organizations are going to be at a disadvantage when competing for and executing grants with the state if payments are not timely? Our current system locks out smaller nonprofits and those run by Black and brown people. When nonprofits are not paid timely and they have limited capital, they can't make payroll. And of course, that disrupts the families of the very people who actually provide critical services to our neighbors in need. And when the state causes a slowdown in payment, services to our residents are sometimes halted or delayed. Even if a vendor can sustain that payment delay, there's waste created by these credit lines, and the only persons that benefit from those are the banks. So I ask you to move this bill forward with a favorable report.
Thank you, Mr. Malone. I'm not sure that Mr. John Brothers is here. Is Mr. Brothers here?
Madam Chair, I think he had to step out for a meeting at 2 o'clock. He'll be back at 2:30. I realize, the hearing may be over by then.
Right. How about Gary Christopher? Same situation, delegate? Do you know?
That actually, I don't know.
Mr. Christopher, Gary Christopher, are you here? Okay, not hearing anything. We're going to assume that he is not. That concludes the favorable panel. Let's open up for questions from the committee. Are there questions from the committee? Give you just a minute. Okay, you must have done a great job, Delegate Stein.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are no further speakers. That concludes the hearing on House Bill 451. And we will move to House Bill 552. This is Delegate Adams, State Finance and Procurement, Retention Proceeds. Delegate Adams, welcome to HGO.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the time today. For the record, Delegate Chris Adams, bringing House Bill 552 related to retention proceeds. I passed the same identical bill for private sector back in 2019. It was under the real property article. So this law change that I'm asking for has already occurred in the private sector with all of the concerns that have been raised in the past on this bill resolved in that setting. So let me just speak with limited time as to the legislative intent on my bill, which is to create a balance in the financial relationship between the owner and its contractor and subcontractors. So that balance that I talk about really does speak to prompt payment under the law. What I would say to you is under current law, retention proceeds at best create ambiguity as to the full and final payment on contracts. And at worst, it does, in fact, lead to the contractor and their subcontractors being the bank. And business owners in these trades are not good bankers. We like to get paid for the work that we're doing. Margins on commercial contracts under competitive environments are after taxes and after costs about 5%. And it just so happens that retention withheld on these type of projects are 5%. So we're talking about that profit margin that is average made on jobs like this. I will say two things that I think are very important for the committee to understand. And that is that there is the process called requisitions. And so commercial jobs, there's material costs and there's labor costs. And usually the owner, the state of Maryland, will allow the contractor to bill out for stored materials and progress payments for labor over time. And so at any point in time where there's a fault or a default under a particular contractor or subcontractor, the owner can stop. In fact, in Maryland, they can withhold any amount at any time that it deems necessary, notwithstanding this law change. But let me just go back to the example. Let's say on a $100,000 subcontract, there's $50,000 in material and $40,000 in labor. So when the subcontractor sends that requisition in for payment for $50,000, they're automatically withheld 5% at that point in time, or $2,500. And normally, under circumstances, even if they're under good terms and conditions, it takes between 60 and 90 days to get paid on each requisition. Sometimes you're luckier, but normally, under these circumstances, you wait very long between the day that you file the requisition, when you get the material, and when you actually get paid. And then under a normal average circumstance with $40,000 in labor on a contract that gets installed over about a 4-month period, you can make progress payments to the subcontractors. Those are requisitions for percentages of completion on these jobs. So in this one example, there's $10,000 per month labor that's accrued, and the state will allow you to bill and they get paid. Again, with retainages withheld from each of those amounts. And then at the end of the work, you get paid normally between 60 and 90 days later. So at every turn, the state has the leverage and the power to stop payment if there's poor performance, stop payment if there's something material wrong in this contract. And the leverage at the end of the day truly falls in the side of the state. So the bill, and where I'm trying to head with this, is to say that under good circumstances, when there's no problems under the contract, when the work is happening properly, and we're at the end of the job, that retention proceeds be paid within 90 days of the date of substantial completion. The date of substantial completion, by the way, is the date with which the state or the owner takes possession of the property for use. And so the other part of that bill, and I think it's important to say that when they take use of the building, that job is for the most part complete. There may be small punch list items that need to be resolved, and I'll just speak to that at the very end. And so when the owner takes possession of the property, we can automatically conclude that there are no major catastrophes, difficulties that are being faced by the owner. And so the other part of my bill, and this is part of the negotiation we had with the private sector a couple years back, was to say that that we're only going to allow for payment for undisputed amounts. And so we left the verbiage open to allow for the owner and the contractor to develop within their own contract what they may or may not mean by undisputed amounts. But the intention here is to allow enough flexibility for the owner and the contractor to understand what that means to them. Is it punch list items? Are there certain agreed items that need to be finished? What does that look like? And differentiate that between the arbitrary withholding of money for 90 days, which can put, I believe, some small family businesses, certain contractors out of business. So thank you very much to the committee. Hopefully this bill will come through this year with a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. So we'll take your panel of favorables before we take questions. So Mr. Ike Casey, please.
Thank you, Madam, and thank you, Delegate Adams, for introducing this again. We've been pushing this thing uphill for a few years now, and it's the same issue of payment. You know, particularly small minority and women subcontractors need that retention payment because that's what keeps them in business. That's either a lot of their overhead, in a lot of cases, their profit. But as a subcontractor, there's a real problem when one thing doesn't go right. And I wonder how many subcontractors have gone out of business because the grass hasn't grown. So in some cases, the state will hold money, the entire amount of retention from the general contractor, because one aspect of the job is not correct. And so we need the payment upon substantial completion when the building is being used, not when the grass grows. And then some of these companies will have the opportunity to be successful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Casey. Bruce Bariano. Bruce, are you there? Richard, do you see him on?
Yeah, it looks like he actually left.
Okay. Then we'll move on to Mr. Champ McCulloch.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee, Champ McCulloch on behalf of the Maryland Associated General Contractors. I don't want to reiterate what the sponsor said because I think he gave a very clear explanation of what's at stake here. But I would like to point out that the state is already protected in two ways. This, for a job over $100,000, the state has a payment and a performance bond. And the performance bond is there to ensure that the contractor performs everything according to contract, including punch list items. So the state has a remedy. Secondly, the law currently provides in Section 226B2 that regardless of retainage, a state unit can withhold any amount that it deems necessary to ensure performance if there are questions about whether or not the contractor is going to fulfill his obligations. DGS, according to the fiscal note, says that they really need the leverage in order to make sure punch list items are completed. Well, frankly, that's not true. If the state wants to monetize the punch list items, it has the full authority under the law to withhold that amount, retainage notwithstanding. So the state's interests are fully protected. And you've heard the problems that arise when retainage is held for prolonged periods of time. The grass doesn't grow all that quickly for a project that's completed in November. So I would urge the committee to give the bill a favorable report.
Thank you. Marcus Jackson, please.
Madam Chair, good afternoon, members of the committee. Thank you. My name is Marcus Jackson, Director of Government Affairs for the Associated Builders and Contractors. We're here today in support of HB 552. The bill relates to payments of amounts held by the state at the end of a project. It only applies to the amount that are undisputed. The bill applies at the point where the project has reached substantial completion, which means the state has use of the building for the purpose it was intended to be used for. At substantial completion, the only work left on a construction project is punch list work or minor cleanup and repair work. By this time in the project, the state has held back 5% of the entire contract price as retention, and an amount that is usually well in excess of the value of the remaining punch list work. Within 90 days, within the 90-day time period called out in the bill, the contractor will almost always have punch list work completed. And since the bill only requires payment of undisputed retention proceeds, if there is a dispute or punch list work incomplete, there is no risk that a release of the undisputed monies will leave the state short of funds it might require to complete the work. The bill simply requires payment to the contractor for substantial amount of contract funds earned, but withheld by the state within a fixed reasonable period of time. On behalf of the 1,500 ABC members in Maryland, we respectfully request a favorable report on HB 550.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. William Yo.
Hello, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is William Yule. I'm the director for the Maryland chapter of the National Electrical Contractors Association, or NECA. I don't really need to reiterate all the things that the the people before me spoke, Delegate Adams, Mr. Casey, Mr. McCullough, Mr. Jackson, all pretty much said everything that you guys need to hear. Again, it goes back to this. There are small, minority women-owned businesses, big and small, doesn't matter. Everyone has this problem when you're finishing up a project, waiting on the payments for retention, but you're still obligations for your paying for your vendors, for your material, for your employees and their labor, the cost of the overhead for your business and your warehouses. All these things need to be met on a timely basis, but you're still waiting for payment. So again, I don't need to reiterate it, but I just hope that you all take the time to really consider this bill, and we ask for a favorable report.
Excellent testimony. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to open it up to the committee for questions. Vice Chair Pena-Melnick.
Thank you so much. So good afternoon, Delegate Adams.
Hello.
Just saw you a few minutes ago.
Yes.
I have a question. Have you seen the letter of information from the Maryland Department of General Services?
I have.
And how will you address their concerns? Specifically, the last paragraph where it says, the contractor may not put the time or effort into completing the remainder work if there's no financial incentive to do so. The only remedy the state will have will be termination of the contract, then procuring and paying another contractor to finish the work. The state will then be required to file a claim against the original contractor to recoup the additional cost incurred.
Right. So that's why I brought up the example of progress payments or requisitions. And if so, there's remaining work that needs to be done. Normally, the contractor will not allow the final requisition to go through until that work's complete. And so the owner, again, has the opportunity before to pay that final requisition. Okay. They can say, well, no, we're not going to pay that, or we'll withhold a percentage of that until all the final punch list items are completed. So that is how in practice that sort of issue is resolved. The other comment that I'd make to you is that in the bill, we leave undefined, undisputed amounts. And so it would allow DGS, if they wanted to further define and clarify what they mean by that, to actually put that in future contracts. All I'm trying to do is create clarification, remove the ambiguity, which there is significant ambiguity. The testimony you've heard today is that retention is held for a number of reasons. In many cases, that reason is not clear to the contractor or their subcontractors. And I'm trying to, under the right circumstances, make sure that we put a timeline on the payment of these retention proceeds. Remember, we're talking about retention doesn't get paid until 90 days after date of substantial completion. That's a full 3 months. And if for some reason on day 85, the state says, well, wait a minute, I've got a problem with touch-up work like DGS says. Well, let me just say that the state has within their jurisdiction the ability to withhold that money. They have to make a statement, though. They have to say why they're doing it. And I think that's all that the contractors and the subcontractors are asking for, is to be far more communicative as to when retention's held out. For money to be held for a year, held for 6 months, even held more than 90 days, I believe we owe it to the contractors who and subcontractors to deliver that sort of explanation. That the bill is very reasonable and open-ended because it's the same question, Vice Chair, that came up during the private sector bill, because we were unsure how to draft it in a way that gave the owner proper protections under the law. And we did come up with, in a reasonable way, the term undisputed amounts. And so we're carrying that same philosophy over. The legislative intent remains to say, as I said earlier on, that at best remove the ambiguity, and at worst, let's stop the practice of having contractors and their subcontractors be the bank when it's not necessary.
Thank you. I'm glad I gave you the opportunity to explain yourself, because it
Yes.
is very clear. Thank you, Chairman Collison.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Delegate Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Delegate, for bringing this bill. Can you explain to us why why a contractor has to get a performance bond and what the performance bond covers?
Well, so the performance and payment bond, that's what I'm familiar with, is a cost that the owner is willing to pay to the contractor, and it provides for 100% guarantee that if the work is not complete or if the performance is not delivered, that the owner can go back to the bonding company and receive payment so they can then find other contractors to do that work. Let me just say that, I would think that that's a fairly rare occurrence because that's a major use of a bond. So something terribly something terribly bad went wrong to get to the point where a bond is actually utilized. But the reason why an owner actually pays for these premiums, it's a bond premium, is to secure their interests under the worst case scenarios.
A follow-up, Madam Chairman?
Of course.
Thank you. So if there's only punch list items left, can the contractor receive part of the performance bond back and the owner still retain part of the performance bond until all punch list items are completed?
So I don't believe that's how the bond is handled. And I alluded to this in my testimony, what could happen? Let's take that $100,000 example. And let's just say that on that contract, it was a drywall contractor, and that they had to touch up 5 or 6 corners in a building, maybe $500 or $600 worth of work. It would not be unreasonable, and I've seen it happen, where the owner will say, okay, we'll pay on the requisition, but for $500 or $600. They don't handle those complaints through retention. They handle it through the withholding of payment during the requisition process. And that's how that's normally handled. Now, I'm not a contractor, I'm a subcontractor. So I have this lens that I'm looking at, and it's not the drywall lens. It's just to tell you that those minor issues are normally handled in a much different fashion and should not be handled through the lens of retainage. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you for the explanation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sure.
Thank you, Delegate. Are there any other questions from the committee members? Seeing none, that concludes the hearing on House Bill 552. And we'll move to House Bill 363, sponsored by Delegate Ruth, Attorney General, Climate Change Actions Authorization. Delegate Ruth, welcome to HGO.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I have permission to screen share, but it's not letting me do that. I think that needs to be enabled.
Richard, can we do that?
Yes, ma'am. Doing that right now. Sorry about that. You should be able to do that now.
Oh, it says, there we go. Okay. Okay, can you see that?
Yes, we can.
Great. So thank you, and Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Delegate Sheila Ruth, and I'm here presenting House Bill 363. HB 363 authorizes the Attorney General to investigate, commence, and prosecute or defend a civil or criminal suit against any publicly traded entity with a market capitalization greater than $1 billion whose unlawful conduct contributed to climate change, and to hire outside counsel on a contingency basis if needed. The climate crisis is not some distant future. It's right here, right now. And we are already suffering the consequences, and they will only get more severe as time goes on unless we intervene now. And of course, this picture is the Alex Haley statue at the city dock just last year, October 29th. And, Annapolis is experiencing severe flooding and also nuisance flooding. Portions of the Annapolis City Dock are underwater 50 to 60 days a year, which is up from 3 to 4 days half a century ago. That's a quote from the Bay Journal. And by 2080, climate forecasts suggest that the city dock will be flooded almost every day if no action is taken. Besides damage from the floodwaters, nuisance flooding leads to lost business downtown. There is a $50 million project in the works to raise the dock walkway, install a barrier, and other improvements to gain 8 feet of sea level protection. $50 million. And so the Eastern Shore is also experiencing more frequent flooding as water levels in the Chesapeake Bay rise. Dorchester County, as this article indicates, is facing difficult choices with some of the highest sea level rise on the East Coast, causing road closures, septic system overflows, skyrocketing flood insurance prices, and damage to homes and businesses. Residents on the Eastern Shore who have lived in the same place for generations are facing the difficult decision of whether to keep rebuilding or move away. And so an April 2021 study by an April 2021 study from Climate Central found that 16 historic sites along the Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad Byway will experience chronic flooding by 2050, and 10 are having chronic flooding now. So this slide indicates a study which shows that Maryland will need $27 billion for seawalls by 2040. The highest county in that study is Dorchester County, expected to be the most expensive county, with $6.5 billion in seawalls needed by 2040. And so that's just, that's not that far away. And so by comparison to the $6.5 billion, the Dorchester County budget is $66 million a year for the operating budget and $5 million for the capital budget, meaning the cost of seawalls will be approximately 100 times the annual Dorchester County budget. Ellicott City has also experienced major flooding, of course, with 2,000-year floods in 2016 and 2018. According to FEMA, the 2016 flood affected 104 businesses and 90 homes, wrecking the economic heart of the city. The area suffered $67.2 million in reduced economic activity, $1.3 million in reduced revenues for Howard County, and between 151 and 550 jobs lost. Howard County is working on a flood mitigation plan called Safe and Sound, with $60 million of secured funding, including $30 million from county sources and $20 million from the state. These are just a few of the astronomical costs that the state and counties and municipalities are already facing, which will only increase in the coming years. And so this is a slide of Annapolis estimated in 2100, the areas that will be underwater according to current emission trajectories. This one is Ocean City, what will be underwater. Sunny day flooding on the Eastern Shore. This is Ellicott City flooding, Route 29 in Prince George's County, flooded farmland, which that we're also seeing saltwater intrusion for agriculture. I didn't show you, I'm sure you can be glad I didn't show you pictures of the sewage backups from rain overflows, more flooding in Annapolis, homes being jacked up. So this raises the question of who should pay for this. Should the taxpayers be on the hook for these costs? Will it even be possible for the state and local jurisdictions to fund them? As far back as the 1960s, scientists from the petroleum industry and fossil fuel companies warned that burning fossil fuels were going to cause major climate consequences with devastating consequences. Yet they've spent decades engaging in advertising campaigns and lobbying to deceive the public. So I ask for a favorable report for HB 363.
Thank you, Delegate. We're going to hear from the panel of supporters and before we open to questions. And we're going to start with Sarah Gross, please. Sarah? Richard, do you see her?
Yes, looks like she is here in the Zoom.
Okay, perhaps on mute. Okay, we're going to go to Isla Schornstein and come back to Sarah. So Isla?
Hi there. Thank you so much. And thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Delegate Ruth, for bringing this important bill. So a little background, the Attorney General's office has a long history of holding bad actors accountable for the damage that they've caused to the people of Maryland. When the tobacco and opioid industries engaged in fraudulent and deceptive practices, it was the Attorney General who took action to hold them accountable for the resulting harms that these actions cause. Now, Maryland communities, as Delegate Ruth pointed out, are facing this existential threat from climate change. But climate change did not happen on its own. The climate emergency that we find ourselves in was created by decades of very well documented denial, deception, and disinformation by the fossil fuel industry. Internal industry documents uncovered by journalists and researchers show that the fossil fuel companies knew as early as the 1960s that burning fossil fuels would raise global temperatures, which would then have disastrous impacts worldwide. By the 1980s, they were predicting, in their own words, globally catastrophic effects. Yet instead of disclosing what they knew, they lied. The oil and gas companies took a page from the tobacco playbook. Like the tobacco companies that denied that their products caused cancer and addiction, oil and gas companies spread disinformation about their products' leading role in causing climate change. Over 600 pages of internal company documents have revealed a massive coordinated campaign to lie to the public, lawmakers, and the media about the catastrophic impacts they knew their products would cause, and then spent millions of dollars to block climate action for decades. Meanwhile, they were quietly preparing their own assets for climate change since the 70s. At the same time these companies were publicly denying the science of climate change, they were filing patents for equipment that would work in a warming Arctic and raising oil rigs to account for sea level rise. These companies lied and deceived Maryland consumers, policymakers, and the public. They violated state law, and now Maryland communities are paying the price in the form of taxpayer dollars. Just like the tobacco and the opioid industries were held accountable for their fraud and deception, the fossil fuel industry must also not be allowed to escape legal liability and pass off these extraordinary costs with impunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thomas Potter, please.
Hi there. Good afternoon, Delegate Cullison, members of the committee. My name is Thomas Potter. I live in Pasadena. I'm a senior studying environmental education at Towson University, and I am a leader for multiple environmental justice movements in the greater Baltimore area. I wanted to address you today to talk about the absolute tyranny with which fossil fuel companies reign and how legislation such as House Bill 363 will help dismantle this wretched machine, this relic of the past, a fossil in its own right. Companies such as Exxon clearly identified the catastrophic impact their product would have on the earth several years before even my parents were born. And here we are generations later, unable to do more than ask these companies to clean up their own spills. These companies have absolutely hijacked the entire future of my generation in the name of short-term profit and self-serving greed. So powerful is the hegemony of the fossil fuel empire that people around the world, such as American attorney Stephen Donziger and the indigenous communities of Ecuador, are silenced, killed, and held as political prisoners with complete impunity for this literally cancerous industry. To put a finer point on it, here we are in the state of Maryland, and we have been addicted to a crumbling industry propped up with massive subsidies and exploitation of the poor and working. Frontline communities such as the good people of Cherry Hill have withstood many terrible injustices, including but not limited to the massive mountains of coal export that blanket the region in toxic dust every single day. I and many others like myself are tasked with organizing those who have been historically wronged and clawing back some semblance of restorative justice. We cannot wait any longer. It is time to put an end to this, and authorizing our Attorney General to engage an outside counsel against the fossil fuel industry is a meaningful step down the road towards progress and justice. Thank you.
Thank you. Hannibal Kemmerer.
Thank you, Delegate Cullison, Chair Pendergrass, Vice Chair Pena-Malnek, and distinguished members of the Health and Government Operations Committee. My name is Hannibal Kemmerer, and I serve as Chief Counsel for Legislative Affairs to Attorney General Brian Frosh. The Attorney General supports passage of House Bill 363, legislation by Delegates Ruth and Terrassa to authorize our office to investigate, commence, and prosecute any suit that holds accountable entities capitalized at over $1 billion whose tortious or otherwise unlawful conduct has contributed to climate change. The legislation further authorizes the Attorney General in his discretion to hire outside counsel on a contingency basis if he deems it in Maryland's best interest. The climate is changing rapidly, and a principal cause of climate change is the production and use of fossil fuels. Climate change is ongoing and intensifying, due largely to increased greenhouse gas emissions resulting from human activity. As noted in my written testimony, Maryland is one of very few states that where the Attorney General expressly lacks common law authority. House Bill 363 will position Maryland on equal footing with other states, 7 of whom have already filed similar suits, along with 20 local jurisdictions. It'll put us on the same standing as those states and other jurisdictions. And It will permit us to hold the fossil fuel companies accountable. In short, if enacted, House Bill 363 will ensure that we're not left behind other jurisdictions and we're able to do what needs to be done. For the foregoing reasons, the Office of Attorney General urges a favorable report on House Bill 363. I look forward to answering any of your questions.
Thank you. Sarah Gross.
Thank you very much. And sorry about my Zoom difficulties. Thank you very much for taking the time to consider this bill. My name is Sarah Gross, and I am the Chief of Affirmative Litigation for the Baltimore City Department of Law. And I am in-house counsel for the city's lawsuit against the fossil fuel industry. I'm not going to belabor the points that have already been made about climate change. It's clearly real. Big Oil has admitted it in their testimony before the House last October. What they didn't admit and what the delegate started to testify about is that what we have evidence of is that Big Oil's own scientists were warning them of the dangers of fossil fuels and climate change as early as the 1960s. And instead of looking for a solution, Big Oil lied. They funded a PR campaign to discredit climate change science that they knew to be true, including giving money to climate change denier groups. The damage of this still persists today because, as we know, some people still deny that climate change is not real in the face of overwhelming evidence. And so that's why Baltimore City filed this lawsuit against them. And the state of Maryland should join this lawsuit. The reason I'm testifying is just to let you know that as someone who's already engaged in this type of lawsuit, from a logistical standpoint, outside counsel bears the cost of these lawsuits and only collect fees if they win. So the cost to taxpayers is negligible. Outside counsel also takes on the bulk of the work so that the Attorney General's office will not be overly burdened. So in short, there's no real downside here to joining with Baltimore City and other localities and states to try to hold Big Oil accountable. So I would ask for a favorable ruling on this particular bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I'm glad you got that tech worked out. Our last speaker on this bill is Jamie Demarco.
Thank you, Chair and members of the community for the committee for the opportunity to speak to you today. My name is Jamie Demarco. I'm the Federal Policy Director at the Chesapeake Climate Action Network, and I urge a favorable report on HB 363. As you've heard and seen, climate change is happening. We all see it, and it will cost Maryland billions of dollars. There are only three options for how to pay for these costs. Option one is to raise billions of dollars in new taxes to pay for climate damages. Option two is to cut billions of dollars in existing state and county services to pay for climate damages. Neither of those options are very appealing, but luckily there is a third option. Option three is to make the fossil fuel companies pay for the mess that their lies caused, to sue the fossil fuel companies, to pass a law to authorize the Attorney General to hire outside counsel on a contingency fee basis to sue the fossil fuel companies. Of those three options, raise taxes, cut services, or sue fossil fuel companies, we firmly believe that option three is the best option. If you prefer this option two, then you should pass HB 363 this year. Not next year, but this year. That is very important. Climate costs are being paid right now. They're eating into local budgets, and litigation takes time. We cannot wait another year to get this process going. We talked about cash flow issues. You know, if folks can't be waiting 90 days to be getting their paycheck, localities cannot be waiting another year to be reimbursed for the cost of climate change. We also need to do it this year because no AG would do a better job with this case than AG Frosch. There is time for AG Frosch to file a case before the end of his term, but only if the General Assembly acts now. And we really, really hope that you will give him the opportunity to make this case a part of his legacy. We urge a swift and favorable report on HB 363. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the panel. I'll open it up to questions from the committee, and we'll begin with Delegate Kaiser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a question for the sponsor, but I would note to the last person speaking in favor of this bill and your preference for Attorney General Frosch doing this, this bill takes effect on October 1st. Anyway, to Delegate Ruth, and I admittedly did walk in a minute late from having stepped out of my office, but I came back and I heard you talking about all the environmental damage. And then with 10 seconds left in your testimony, you addressed why this solution. And when I look at the bill language, I don't see anything directed to the fossil fuel industry, but just to companies whose net is over $1 billion. How did you settle on this solution to the problem and not some other solution?
Well, thank you for the question. And by this solution, do you mean authorizing the Attorney General to file suit? Is that?
Yeah, your bill. I mean,
yeah, okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the companies that caused this through deceptive action should be the ones that have to pay for it. They knew as far back as the 1960s that this was a problem. Their scientists told them it was a problem. In 1968, there was a report that, in 1968, scientists with the American Petroleum Institute warned that rises in CO2 were could cause melting of the Antarctic ice cap, rising sea levels, warming oceans, and changes in plant and animal life. In 1978, an Exxon scientist named James Black wrote a paper called The Greenhouse Effect, which warned that human-caused emissions could bring about serious consequences. And so from 1968, they have spent money lobbying and advertising, massive advertising campaigns to deceive the public, to make the public believe that climate change was not real, and then when it became clear that it was real, to convince the public that it was not human caused. And so these deceptive actions, we could have taken action decades ago and prevented this. And one thing I will note is that that last year, the oil companies made $174 billion in profits. That's $476 million a day, which means that they made the Dorchester County annual budget in 3 hours. So they have the money, they're responsible for it, they're the ones that should pay for it, not the taxpayers.
Hey, Delegate. Okay. Moving to Delegate Rosenberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before the Attorney General sued the tobacco companies or those who had profited from opioids, I don't recall that we had to pass legislation giving him that authority. If that is correct, and tell me if I'm not, if it isn't, why do we need legislation here? Why is this lawsuit different from those other lawsuits in that regard?
Thank you. Can I ask Hannibal to address that?
Yes.
Sure. It's okay with me, not the chair.
And it's okay with me.
Thank you, thank you,
Ahead,
Delegate Rosenberg and Delegate Ruth. I obviously wasn't a lawyer at the time we challenged the tobacco industries. My recollection, it could be wrong, so I'll apologize in advance, is that we brought that litigation under the Consumer Protection Act for unfair, deceptive, false, and misleading advertising. I could be wrong about that, and I'd like the opportunity to go check just to make sure. But this just makes pellucidly clear for us, our lawyers, both in-house and out, and for the industry that we have this authority, and it wouldn't be something that might be subject to a motion to dismiss. So we commend it to the committee for passage.
And I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe that for the opioid suits that we did pass something. Is that correct?
That sounds correct, but I'd want to check that one as well. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you.
Please.
Yeah, so just to remind us, though, we generally have just one responder to each question.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay. It's fine, but just to remind folks. Delegate Bagnall.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the bill sponsor for bringing this forward. It's clear you've done your homework, you've done your research, and I just want to ask, why is it important that we pass this now? Why this year?
Well, thank you so much for that question, Delegate. And we simply believe that Attorney General Frosch is the best person to institute this lawsuit. We have an election. We have no idea what the priorities of the next Attorney General are going to be. It's going to be, take them time to get their feet under them. We don't know who the next governor is going to be, whether they're going to be in favor of something like this. But we do know that Attorney General Frosch has been a strong champion for the state of Maryland, and that he is absolutely the right person to initiate this lawsuit. Now, I know Delegate Kaiser pointed out the bill doesn't take effect until October 1st. That still would give the Attorney General, if he chose to do that, and that would be up to him, but to start preparing for it and to initiate any lawsuits and get that on the books, to take that burden, from the next Attorney General, where they could then pick up the ball and carry it forward. And we just believe that Attorney General Frosch is the best person to start this. And if the committee felt that the bill needed to take effect sooner to give the current Attorney General more time, that would be up to the committee if they wanted to amend that. Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Salega.
Thank you so much. So to Delegate Ruth, so the point of this is to have the Attorney General, clearly your preference is Brian Frosch, but lawsuits take way longer than 2 months. So you might try a new argument on that. But nonetheless, to sue companies that make more than $1 million. Is that right?
No, billion. And only publicly traded.
Publicly traded companies that have make more than $1 billion. And so your target is who? Clearly you have something in mind.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, Delegate. It's actually publicly traded companies with a market capitalization greater than $1 billion. And certainly we're looking at the oil companies as the primary target for this. And I know there was last year some concerns about other companies getting swept up in unintended consequences. We did this year put in that limitation of marketing of publicly traded companies with a market capitalization greater than $1 billion in order to really limit that and avoid the unintended consequences of other companies getting swept up. And with that change, a lot of the opposition from last year is now taking no position.
So that being said, it sounds like your focus is the oil companies, according to what you just said. Would you like to put them out of business? Is that your goal?
No, absolutely not. I mean, of course, we need to be moving away from any kind of, oil and fossil fuel use, but we can't just drive companies out of business. There are people who work and depend on those companies for work, and there needs to be a transition. Those are things that we as a General Assembly are dealing with right now, how to address that transition in a fair way. Certainly not intending to drive the oil companies out of business, but what they should do is to pay for the damage they caused. I don't believe that Maryland's taxpayers should be on the hook for billions of dollars when it was avoidable because companies spent money to deceive the public.
Well, I look forward to seeing you document that deception and hope that you don't use anything that uses fossil fuels in your daily life. Thank you.
Delegate Riley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I just kind of want to mention, I know Delegate Ruth and some of the other folks were kind of comparing the tobacco industry and that lawsuit in comparison to this particular bill, to where it's apples and oranges. Tobacco was not something that we needed to survive. Fossil fuel for generations is the product that kept us warm, kept us to get from A to B, and I can go on and on and on. So it's a product that in society we have needed, we have used, and they were there. So, the tobacco industry, I can see that, but again, they're completely different. So you can't really explain one to the other in my mind, because tobacco was something that you smoked as a choice, as an enjoyment. And that was, we found out that was a little bit, deception. And I agree with that, tobacco, they knew that it was going to be addictive. But it has nothing to do with what you're trying to do here with the fossil fuel industry. And I just wanted to make that statement.
Delegate Riley, do you have a question?
Isn't that so? Thank you.
May I respond, Madam Chair?
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for the question, Delegate. You know, if we had known 40 plus years ago that our use of fossil fuels was going to put us in the situation we are now, we would have had 4 decades to start moving away from fossil fuels. And maybe at one time we believed that fossil fuels were necessary, and maybe at one time they were, but we have believed for 40 years that those fossil fuels were not harmful, or at least many people believed that, because of the deception of the oil companies. And so we could have had a 40-year head start on trying to transition away from fossil fuels. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further hands, and no further speakers, that concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 363. The committee is now going to take a 15-minute break to give us all a chance to stand and stretch. And we will, actually, it's going to be 18 minutes, and we will begin again promptly at 3:30 to complete the last 5 bills of the day. So I'll see you all at 3:30. Thank you.
You.
Oh, shoot, I did forget that after I said that. We'll begin in about 2 minutes. Listen to music. Richard, is Delegate Corman here?
I'm here, Delegate Colson.
Oh, okay, great, thank you. I was looking forward to Mr. Swit, Delegate.
He had to pinch hit me in another committee recently, so I can send you the video. He did a great job.
Oh, okay. I look forward to seeing it.
Less sarcastic, but other than that, it was great.
Ow. Okay, it is 3:30 and we will reconvene this bill hearing of the Health and Government Operations Committee. We are beginning with House Bill 375, sponsored by Delegate Corman. Open Meetings Act application and enhanced requirements, Maryland State Agency Transparency Act of 2022. Welcome to HGO, Delegate Corman.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate being here. During the last interim, I served with Delegate Shalega on the Governor's Star Commission, which was a state transparency and reform commission. And one of the recommendations of that commission was to require our quasi-government agencies to stream their board meetings. And if that sounds familiar, it's because this committee over the past few years has passed a number of bills by several legislators, for example, Delegate Carr's initiative on the Maryland Transportation Authority, State Board of Elections, a few others, to require them to stream their meetings. This expands that to a broader set of about 10 other additional quasi-governmental agencies. You'll notice some ones in here that look familiar, like the Maryland Environmental Service, the Public Service Commission, again, the Maryland Transportation Authority. And that's just because we're sort of reorganizing the code a little bit since we're asking so many organizations to do this and streamlining it under the Open Meetings Act. The bill requires the live video streaming of their meetings, the posting of meeting materials 48 hours in advance, and the posting of meeting minutes within 2 days of their approval at a meeting. And again, these are provisions that apply to a number of quasi agencies already and will be expanded further by this legislation. I do have 2 amendments that we've sent over. One is to just make an explicit exception for sort of field trips where official business is not being done. It's sort of arguable that the Open Meeting Act doesn't apply in those situations anyway, but a number of the quasis have asked for it to be clarified that they are allowed to sort of go on, site visits without running afoul of the need to stream their meetings. And the other is to remove MAIF, the Maryland Auto Insurance Fund, from this. MAIF is very different than a lot of these other quasis. I'll say one thing I learned serving on the Star Commission is that they're all a little bit different from each other. But MAIF, first of all, competes in like an open insurance market. And so their competitors obviously don't have to do this. They also don't get direct state or even special funds. So they're a little bit different. They've also put in testimony that explains why they think they should be excluded. The Senate sponsor and I sort of agree with their conclusions. So with that, Madam Chair, happy to answer any questions, but hope this committee can continue its work to make these quasi-government agencies a little bit more transparent, and accessible to the people of Maryland. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. I'm going to go through the favorable panel and then we'll ask questions. So I'll ask for Morgan Drayton, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Morgan Drayton, Policy and Engagement Common Cause Maryland, and thank you so much for the opportunity to offer testimony here before the committee today. We are in support of HB 375. This legislation would significantly increase access to and the efficiency of certain state agencies and public bodies by making them subject to enhanced Open Meetings Act requirements. As we've learned over the course of the pandemic, live streaming video and online access to meeting materials are easy and efficient ways to enhance Marylanders' access to agencies throughout the state. Not everyone has the time or the means to make it to Annapolis for in-person hearings. Archiving these streams along with the meeting materials and minutes ensures that those who are unable to watch the stream will have access to that footage later. And while many agencies and public offices already stream and archive their meetings, these enhanced requirements will ensure that all Marylanders have that opportunity to access meetings where decisions are being made that will impact them and their communities. So for those reasons, we urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Nancy Soering, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm Nancy Soering, President of the League of Women Voters of Maryland. The League of Women Voters believes that democratic government depends on informed and active participation by the public. We further believe that governmental bodies must protect the citizens' right to know by giving adequate notice of proposed actions, holding open meetings, and making public records accessible. This bill adds some 10 state agencies to those that have to comply to open meetings law, and it makes consistent the transparency requirement for some 20 state government entities that make important fiscal and or policy decisions that have direct impact on the public interest. When fiscal and policy decisions are made, the public who funds these agencies and is impacted by their actions has a right to know what actions are being taken, how the decision was made, and the reason for the decision. We thank the sponsors for submitting this bill, for bringing the proceedings of some of these bodies out of the shadows and into the sunlight. We urge a favorable report on HB 375. Thanks.
Thank you. Good to see you, Nancy.
Good to see you.
I'm going to go ahead and call the favorable with amendments because I think you'll speak to the amendments that the delegate already began to talk to, and that is starting with Rebecca Snyder.
Good afternoon, committee. My name is Rebecca Snyder, the Executive Director of the Maryland Delaware DC Press Association. We wholeheartedly support the legislation with the amendments that the sponsor had outlined. We believe, in addition to what's been said previously, that this will allow reporters to more fully cover some of these agencies, which have, sometimes in the past, that quasi-governmental aspect has been problematic in terms of Open Meetings Act compliance and so forth. And so I feel like this bill really just clarifies, yes, you're part of Open Meetings law, and this is important to make sure.
Excuse my interruption. Excuse my interruption. Somebody needs to mute his or her computer because we're hearing a conversation that we shouldn't be hearing. Thank you.
I worry that was me because I'm in a Senate hearing room, and I'll mute and take questions if necessary. Thank you. We urge a favorable report.
Thank you, Rebecca. And Al Redmer, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Al Redmer from Maryland Auto. We appreciate the collaboration with the sponsor of the bill, and based on your heavy schedule, we will just support the bill with the sponsor's amendment. With me is our board chair, Ann Ansel, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Good to see you back in HGO, Al. Those are the speakers. Wait, I'm sorry. Did Ann Ansel want to speak or just answer questions? Ann?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I would echo Mr. Redmer's comments. We are in support of the bill as amended by Delegate Corman, and we thank him for his support and for the members' support. Thank you.
No, thank you. So with that, I will open it up for questions from the committee.
Yes, too.
Are there any questions? Delegate Landis.
Yes, thank you so very much. I don't have a question, I just have a comment, and that is that clarity and accountability, transparency, full disclosure can only make our process of governing and our democracy. It can add tremendous value. So I support this wholeheartedly.
Isn't that so?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Delegate Carr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Delegate Corman, for bringing this bill. Do you know offhand, like how many of these agencies are in the habit of posting their meeting packets, the information that they share with board members in advance, which is what this bill calls for? I know that MDTA often posts it like a couple minutes before the meeting, which makes it a little harder for the public to follow along.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Delegate Carr, and actually really thanks for your work on this issue because you've been working on it since before I was in the General Assembly. It's a real mixed bag. I would say right now, because of COVID, that's had, as frankly it has for the General Assembly, the sort of strange effect of making things slightly more transparent and accessible. But most still don't put those meeting packets on ahead of time, as you're well aware. The streaming's been a lot better during the age of COVID, but we want to lock in a lot of those gains with this legislation.
Are there any other questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the hearing on House Bill 375. Thank you, Delegate Corman. And we'll move to House Bill 395. Delegate Stewart, Public Records, Retention and Inspection, Communications, Transparency and Public Records Act of 2022. Welcome to HGO, Delegate Stewart.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it. For the record, I'm Delegate Vaughn Stewart. This is HB 395, the Transparency and Public Records Act, and I am happy to be here with your committee this afternoon. So nearly 40 years ago, the General Assembly passed a law that required each unit of government to establish a record retention program for the quote unquote continual, economical, and efficient management records of the unit. The goal was simple: to increase transparency and accountability and to provide Marylanders with information about actions taken by their elected officials. These record management plans, they have to include procedures for record security, for record deletion, and for the transfer of permanent records to the state's archives. And so agencies right now essentially work with both the state archives and the Department of General Services to draft these record retention plans of what documents they have to keep, which ones they don't have to keep and can delete, et cetera. However, our predecessors in the General Assembly neglected to define quote unquote unit of government. So HB 395 clarifies that the office of governor is a unit of government for purposes of the record retention statute. And the bill also makes a couple of small changes to both the record retention law and then conforming changes to the Maryland Public Information Act to essentially modernize the language and ensure that the record retention schedules include written, electronic, or recorded communications between state officials about state business. But mostly, I'm sort of viewing this as mostly a clarifying bill. So governors, past and present, have exploited the statutory ambiguity here to argue that as the head of the executive branch, as it's sort of its head, they're not a unit of government. And thus are exempt from record retention requirements. Now, I am merely a retired lawyer, and I was never a very good one. But in my view, I think it's a tenuous legal argument to say that because they're the head of the government, that the office of the governor is not a unit of government. And I think that argument would probably fail in court. I think that it's unlikely that the General Assembly would have intended 40 years ago to exempt the most important part of the executive branch from a law increasing transparency in the executive branch. And indeed, in a 2000 case, the Maryland Court of Appeals weighed in on this issue. And after noting the lack of legislative history on the definition of unit of government, the court concluded that with respect to the Public Information Act, quote unquote, the offices of the governor and his staff in the State House and Shaw House in Annapolis, as well as their offices in Baltimore and Washington, are clearly encompassed by the statutory language, quote unquote, unit or instrumentality of the state government. So in conclusion, Marylanders have a right to know how decisions were made by the officials that they voted for and that they financed with their taxpayer dollars. We should preserve important historical documentation related to activities of our governors, regardless of their partisan affiliation, to make sure that these documents are available for study and review by future governments, by future historians, and by everyday Marylanders. After all, we can only learn from the past if we know how it unfolded. Maryland should strive to have the most transparent government in the country, and by clarifying a definition and closing this big loophole, HB 395 represents a small step in that direction. I urge a favorable report.
Thank you, Delegate. I'm going to call the favorable panel, then take questions. Morgan Drayton.
Hello again, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Again, for the record, my name is Morgan Drayton, Policy and Engagement Manager with Common Cause Maryland, and we support HB 395. Most of us here are probably aware that last year the Office of the Governor was discovered to have been using a digital platform that destroyed communications within 24 hours, making it impossible to access what could be considered public records through the Public Information Act. And with the proliferation of apps like Wicker, WhatsApp, and Snapchat that have similar functions, there's no telling if this is happening with other public officials or state employees. And that is definitely something that we want to discourage. The PIA exists for a reason. It is an essential tool for public oversight of our state, local, and county government. It ensures that Marylanders have access to data collected with public dollars and allows greater insight as to the workings of state offices and elected officials. But this transparency is impossible if state officials and employees are able to shield information through the use of these digital platforms. And as HB 395 would ensure that communications made through these platforms are retained and available under the PIA, we urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Nancy Sorek.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I won't repeat, as I said before, the League of Women Voters' strong support for transparency in government. I would just say that, as the sponsors stated, the bill does expand the definition of public record to include any written, electronic, or recorded or audio communication, and it clarifies what a unit of government is. We believe that the best way to ensure that public officials are acting in the best interests of the public is to make sure that official interactions between elected officials, government agencies, and state employees are transparent. Therefore, we urge a favorable report in HB 395. Thank you.
Thank you. And Rebecca Snyder.
Good afternoon, committee. I'm Rebecca Snyder with the Maryland, Delaware, DC Press Association. I hope that it's not too noisy in this little nook. We sit in full support of this bill as well. I think the sponsor and other proponents clearly discussed the transparency aspect. And we think that it is very important to make sure that we're looking at all records. So rather not splitting hairs on the format, but focusing on the records that state officials and employees are creating in the course of their duties, as well as reclassifying or clarifying the units of government. This will allow access to a broader cross-section of the public or a broader range of records to the public, and it helps journalists to cover these topics more fully. So we urge a favorable report. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That is all of the speakers. So I will open it up for questions from the committee and begin with Delegate Rosenberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Question for the sponsor. Would this bill affect any pending litigation regarding the availability of or the applicability of this law to certain documents of the governor's office, and why?
I'm not aware of any pending litigation currently, Delegate Rosenberg. I mean, it's a good question. I'm not aware of any pending lawsuits against the current governor that this would affect. My view, though, is that I think that if this issue was litigated, if this unit of government issue was litigated, I think that the court, just as it held in the MPIA context, I think the Court of Appeals would likely to be following precedent to say that the governor is a unit of government. The governor's office is a unit of government for the purpose of the record retention law as well. However, I rather than having to go through the entire litigation, process and waste a lot of both taxpayer money and attorneys' costs, I think it's better to clarify it, and that's why the bill is before you.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the hearing on House Bill 395. Thank you, Delegate Stewart. And we will move to House Bill 450, Delegate Smith, Minority Business Enterprises, Calculation of Participation Rates, Procurements from Maryland Correctional Enterprises. Delegate Smith, welcome to HGO.
I'm happy to be here this session. Good afternoon to Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and all members of the committee. For the record, my name is Delegate Stephanie Smith, and I'm here to present House Bill 450, and I do hope to gain a favorable report. House Bill 450 seeks to repeal an exemption to the Minority Business Enterprise Law by amending the State Finance and Procurement Code. Current MBE law requires state agencies to make every effort to achieve an overall minimum goal of 29% of the total dollar value of their procurement contracts directly or indirectly from certified MBE firms. However, state procurement units are permitted to exclude the total dollar value of procurement contracts with Maryland Correctional Enterprises when calculating their MBE goal. Maryland Correctional Enterprises, which I'll be referring to as MCE, is the state's legally mandated preferred provider. It's also a prison labor organization that pays their laborers as little as 17 cents per hour. House Bill 450 would require the inclusion of MCE contracts in these calculations. The Mbe program was created in 1978 to help provide equitable opportunities for minority-owned businesses to rectify decades of discrimination that resulted in certain groups being socially and economically disadvantaged. Prior to each reauthorization of Maryland's Mbe program, the state conducts a disparity study to determine whether there is continued evidence that MBEs are underutilized in state contracting. Unfortunately, the disparity study conducted prior to the most recent reauthorization of Maryland's Mbe program found ongoing large and statistically significant disparities in the use of MBEs by the state compared to their availability in the marketplace. Relevant to this discussion is the long and painful history of the American criminal justice system, a system that has victimized and imprisoned generations of people of color and exploited dirt cheap prison labor to rake in untold profits. This victimization and exploitation continues to this day. In fact, the state of Maryland has the highest number of incarcerated young Black men ages 18 to 24 in the nation. Number 2 is the state of Mississippi, a state from which I have many ancestors and also have family to this day. There is a sick irony in this system. The state claims a commitment to ensuring opportunity for minority-owned businesses through its MBE program, but then it designates MCE as its preferred provider and exempts any MCE contracts from counting towards its MBE goal. Finally, minority-owned businesses have disproportionately been impacted by the pandemic, and as well as obviously having adverse economic impacts, they've also faced more difficulty accessing vital PPP loans and other supports. It's more important now than ever before for Maryland to reaffirm its commitment to ensuring equity for minority-owned businesses. However, cannot do this if we continue to undercut our pledge to equitable patronage of minority-owned businesses with these exemptions. And I want to note that a prior version of the Maryland Correctional Enterprises website, I can't find it on the current site, actually noted that you could use their services and purchase their products and otherwise circumvent other MBE goals by using it. So it's part of even the marketing of MCE's items for sale that you could elude otherwise the intent behind MBE regs. So I think with Maryland becoming pursuant to the 2020 census, the fourth most racially diverse state in the country and the most racially diverse on the East Coast. I think it's incumbent upon us to ensure that our goals as a state, as it pertains to procurement and equity, are not otherwise undermined by exemptions like the one we find here today. So I urge a favorable report for House Bill 450, and do thank you for your time and welcome any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. I'm going to take the other member of your panel and then we'll take questions. Robert Daschle. Mr. Daschle. Richard, you see him, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So, Mr. Daschle, perhaps you're on mute.
His machine may be on mute instead of his Zoom.
Yeah. Why don't we see if there are any questions for the delegate while Mr. Daschle works out his technology? Questions for the sponsor of the bill? Delegate Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Delegate Smith, for this really good bill. You know, this is one of my big baby issues. What's your understanding of why we allow this not to be counted? What positive impact what we have thought as a legislator was being served?
I believe that the exemptions that are given to MCE, I think the thought process from talking with the state is that it provides some level of training opportunities for those behind the wall to learn certain skills that perhaps could be transferable outside of the wall. But it also, I think, there's more data that I think, I know Delegates Moon, I think Delegate Wilkins are also looking into ground truthing that aim, as noble as it is as well, through separate legislation. But I just wanted to, kind of give you that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Robert Daschle, are you?
Yes, Madam Chair, I think I'm with you now.
There we go. Good to see you. Good to hear from you. Okay,
I bought this new monitor and it didn't have. Anyway,
we got it now. We're good.
Thank you so much. I'm testifying in support of this bill as one who has spent the last 44 years of my professional career as an attorney supporting not just the utilization of minority business, but small business in general. And I think it's important to note here that sometimes we get confused about what the real importance of opening up government contracting to small and minority business. Sometimes we think that it's just about improving the profit margins for the owners, but it's really not. It's really about employment. And what we know that the data shows is that small and minority businesses are the greatest employers, percentage-wise, proportionally, of the very people who need the employment the most. And ironically, by excluding CES purchasing from the total value of contracts, you're really reducing the likelihood of the availability of jobs for the people who are now performing the work inside a prison. So they're cutting off the nose, they're gnawing on their own arm, in other words. So I think that I urge the committee to favorably report on this bill and reverse this unintended consequence. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Daschle. Thank you for your perseverance and for being here today. Are there any questions for Mr. Daschle? Okay, seeing none, that completes the hearing on House Bill 450. Thank you, Delegate Smith. And we will move to House Bill 462, Delegate Pena-Melnick, Health Occupations, Authorized Prescribers Reporting of Financial Gratuities or Incentives. Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. I seek your support today on House Bill 462. This bill will require authorized prescribers who receive a financial gratuity or incentive from a pharmaceutical distributor or manufacturer to file a financial disclosure form with a health occupation board that licenses the authorized prescriber within 30 days after the financial gratuity or incentive is received. By doing so, this bill would empower licensing boards to develop regulations for the targeted and private review of the reports. And basically, this bill creates transparency. The bill does not dictate how the boards will go about evaluating these reports, but rather directs the boards to collect this financial data so that they can review it privately and decide what they want to do with it. It's not overly prescriptive. With this data in hand, the boards can then take appropriate disciplinary action against any unauthorized, any basically prescriber who has received a payment that violates the Maryland Health Occupation Board. It is no secret that financial relationships between prescribers and industry partners influence prescribing patterns and lead to overprescribing. Studies have demonstrated this association time and time again. In fact, a recent review of the literature revealed that there are at least 30 studies published in medical journals identifying a relationship between payments and increased prescribing of the paying company's drug. Increased prescribing cost, they increased prescribing brand drugs. And this has been an issue, especially when you think about opioids and how many people died every year in Maryland. This past year alone, over 2,000. Existing federal law known as the Open Payments Program require applicable manufacturers of drugs, devices, and biological or medical supplies to do a report annually. But that burden is on the company. There's no requirement on the provider at all. And there's no transparency there. So this bill would require basically in Maryland that these providers file this form with the boards. The bill is drafted, as I said, in a very not very prescriptive. On page 2, line 26, it says that the information disclosed by the authorized prescriber on the form of this section may be used. It says may be used. It is not mandatory by the Health Occupation Board only to audit, investigate, or take disciplinary action against the authorized prescriber. Again, on page 3 of the bill, it says that it may not be disclosed to the public. And then it says that if an unauthorized prescriber willfully fails to file a financial disclosure form, basically the board may, again, not shall, not mandatory, impose a fine not to exceed $1,000 per violation. And it says that the Health Occupation Board shall adopt regulations to implement this section. So this is really an important bill. And I think that in the end, it will create transparency and it will save lives. And I ask for a favorable report.
Thank you, Delegate. I'm going to go next to Patricia O'Connor. Pat? Richard, you see her?
Yes, ma'am. It
Okay,
looks like she's unmuted and her video's on.
ready to go. Okay, Pat. Technology issues. All right, let's go to Steve Wise, who's favorable with amendment. Come back to Pat, maybe when she works the technology out. So Steve?
Thank you, Delegate Cullison and members of the committee. I'm here today representing MedChi and the Maryland Academy, Maryland chapter of American College of Emergency Physicians. There's a few things I want you to understand, and before we get to how we would suggest amending the bill. One, physicians are not opposed to the disclosure of this information. It should be accessible to the public. And as a matter of fact, it already is. Under the Federal Open Payments Database, which you can Google and log into right now, you can look up the name of any physician and find out anything of value that was given to that physician by a drug manufacturer that was valued at $11 or more. So you will see lots of entries on there for $12 or $13. So the information is out there. Furthermore, at least as to the Board of Physicians, the ability to discipline and even revoke the license of a physician who has taken things of value from drug manufacturers and in turn prescribe their products at a rate they shouldn't have or to patients they shouldn't have. That is all already in the wheelhouse of the Board of Physicians. They can take action on that tomorrow. So we think that there's no need to have a new database or a new reporting of information that's already out there. And as to the Board of Physicians, you don't need a new disciplinary grounds. They can discipline right now on that. What we do think might be an improvement is right now, when you look up a physician on the Maryland Board of Physicians website, you get lots of information, but we've suggested maybe providing a link right there to this federal database so you could also get this information. And that makes it even more readily available than it already is. We would certainly support that amendment, and I'm not going to speak for the board, but it's my understanding that they would support that as well. Final note, this applies to other prescribers. I don't know what the status of their boards are or what their disciplinary grounds are. I'm speaking strictly to physicians. Thank you, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Wise. Pat O'Connor, are you able to speak with us now?
So it seems like she's unmuted. However, audio isn't coming in through.
Okay. So why don't we, is she nodding at you to say, can you hear us? Pat, can you hear us? Okay. Because she can call in on the phone. If you can send her the phone number, and we'll take questions from the committee until she can get in on the phone. Does that work, Richard?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thanks. Then questions of the speakers we've had so far. Delegate Shalega.
Thank you. I may need to change my hand color again because I'm like it's blending in. This question is for Steve. Where are you in my Brady Bunch? It's terrible, but I do like to look at you while I'm asking you a question and you're here somewhere. So Steve Wise, how fascinating to have this tool. I didn't even know it was there. And it seems very thorough because I looked up a couple of friends who are physicians and the amounts was like $11.15 for food and beverage, $22. So it's certainly going down to quite a very de minimis amount. So I don't know if we need a bill for this. I guess that's my question. I mean, can't the Board of Physicians just, add this link on their website and satisfy that and at least get that out of the bill?
Well, that would certainly be our hope. Yeah, I think that the information is available in the disciplinary grounds, at least to the Board of Physicians. I think there's 3 different disciplinary grounds that you can use right now to go after a physician who is acting out of bounds when it comes to this. So, but we do feel like if the General Assembly wants to do something here, putting the information maybe right there when you're looking up that physician on the board's website, we have no problem with that.
All right. Yeah, thank you so much. That's pretty amazing. I encourage all of you to take a look at that. It's in Steve's testimony. Thank you.
Okay, we're having a little sound problem all the way around today. Pat, can you hear us now? Okay, we can't hear you yet.
I think she's trying to dial.
Yeah, she's speaking with someone right now. Pat, can you hear us?
I just let her in.
Oh, okay. Pat, are you there?
Hello?
There we go.
Hello?
We can hear you.
Thank you for your patience.
Oh, thank you for keep trying.
Sure, this is such an important bill. Richard, what should I do to reduce the echo?
Oh, you're fine. You can just keep using that, your phone. Just stay on if you would like.
So,
Turn.
Maybe she needs to turn off the,
Right, turn
web.
off the web. So leave the meeting on the computer, Pat, so that you're just on the phone.
thank you so much.
There we go. Now we can hear you.
Without that echo now.
Yeah.
Fantastic. The discussion so far has addressed several of the background issues that relate to this bill, but have left unstated the very targeted purpose that this bill is intended to achieve. By asking Maryland prescribers to file reports with their licensing boards, the boards will have the specific information that is needed to enforce the web of anti-kickback, self-referral, and other laws that are on our books. It's not practical or feasible for boards to search through the massive federal open payments database with regard to every licensee. We hope and expect that if this bill becomes law, and we hope that it does, we'll learn that there aren't many prescribers in Maryland who accept financial gratuities and incentives. If that isn't the case, our licensing boards need to know. And if it is the case for only a few, they can target their efforts for the egregious cases and take appropriate action. This information will not be available to the public in the way that the open payment database is, because this reporting function is intended to be a tool that will allow the boards to have specific information about specific prescribers that they can then use to audit and investigate and take disciplinary action, if appropriate, with regard to those receipts of financial gratuities and incentives that are implicated by our other laws on the books. We think it will be a simple implementation for the boards. We believe that the assistance it will provide is essential. We are asking for your favorable report.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you for your perseverance as well. Delegate Hill, you have a question.
Yes, thank you. So, Pat, I heard you say that you think this is really critical, and you haven't had this information for a while. Is there something that's happened to make you, to make the AG's office feel like this is an untapped, fount of criminal activity that's been going on? What's going on that we're suddenly doing this?
So thanks for the question, Delegate Hill. I would say that Chair Kelly of Finance Committee has been interested in a bill like this for several years, and we have talked about it. And that is because we have a complaint-driven process, generally speaking, for the licensing boards. But the nature of this wrongdoing, these violations, anti-kickback, self-referral, those are not easily visible or easily detectable relationships or events. So that by imposing a reporting requirement, the boards will have information from their prescribers. And we honestly believe that, we don't expect there to be a lot of reports that get filed, but we may be wrong in believing that. And we think the boards need to know that. More importantly, to the extent that there are reports that represent large amounts of financial incentives and gratuities, again, we believe the boards need to know that, because without this tool, it is a challenge to know where to look, how to find it, and what it means.
Okay, Delegate.
Follow-up?
Any other questions from the committee? I have a question, I think, for the sponsor. Delegate, so you said that you wanted to leave the bill sort of flexible for the board. So this means that each board could come up with its independent sort of reporting processes and disciplinary processes, or are you looking for a standardized reporting process, and maybe the disciplinary processes, if needed, might be different for each board?
It actually, and thank you, Chairman, for the question. The bill is drafted in a very flexible way, where it says may use, and it says the board's occupation board shall adopt regulations. So it does leave it up to the board to determine how it works best for them, and what type of regulations actually to adopt. So it's not prescriptive at all, and it doesn't have any mandatory language, and it gives them the flexibility because they're all very different.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Seeing no other questions from the committee, that concludes the hearing on House Bill 462. Thank you very much.
Thank you so
Delegate
much.
Tanya Melnick.
Thank
And we go to
you.
the final bill of the day, which is House Bill 790, Delegate Kerr, Health Occupations, Podiatric Physicians. Delegate Kerr.
Good afternoon, Chair Cullison, members of Health and Government Operations Committee. I am Delegate Ken Kerr here once again to present Health Occupations, Podiatric Physicians. This year it's House Bill 790. By now, most of this committee is very familiar with the purpose of this bill, as this is the third year I've brought it forward. Last year, this committee voted 20 in favor to 4 opposed to send this bill to the floor with a favorable report. It went on to pass the House with a vote of 99 to 34. Unfortunately, the Senate failed to act prior to the end of the 2021 regular session. So today, we following the Senate hearing last Thursday on the cross-filed bill, the panel and I are here today to show continued support for this bill, whose only action is to alter the term podiatrist to podiatric physician in Maryland law, just as 3/4 of the states and the federal government have already done. Madam Chair, I ask that you now call upon Richard Block, the Executive Director of the Maryland Podiatric Medical Association, who will introduce our panel. And we ask for your continued support of HB 790 as we await action in the Senate.
Thank you, delegates. So Richard Block.
Thank you, Delegate. Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, members of the committee. I will ask that Dr. Adam Lowy will do the introduction.
Okay, Mr. Lowry.
Yep. Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Adam Lowy. I'm a podiatrist and surgeon in Montgomery County. Again, asking everybody for favorable support of House Bill 790. Like our sponsor previously said, this is a continuation of trying to get this bill passed. We ask for everybody's favorable support. With just something that I'd like to bring to light, in 2021, after the bill attempted to go through the House last year, our president of the Maryland Podiatric Medical Association was granted the honor of Physician of the Year at University of Maryland Midtown campus. Another one of our board members last year was also nominated to be Physician of the Month by Carroll Community Hospital. There is no distinction, there's no separation between our bill or our name and what we're trying to obtain. We are podiatric physicians. We're also foot and ankle surgeons. We're also podiatrists. We carry the name of all of them. This is essentially just asking to put our name officially in the state legislature as a podiatric physician. Thank you guys for your time.
Mr. Block, who's to follow Mr. Lowry?
Thank Dr. Vincent Martirana.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Madam Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to be able to address you today. Out of respect for your long day, I'm going to be extremely brief. I'd just like to impress upon you that from our first day at podiatric medical school, we are impressed by the fact that the foot is a mirror for systemic disease. We're educated and trained in the entire body. We don't just treat the foot and ankle. We treat patients with foot and ankle disorders. You have my written testimony online, and we made the point about our contributions both clinically as well as in our leadership roles, and so I'm not going to repeat that. But I'd like to also kindly ask you to take note of the letters of support that are documented online from our physician colleagues. After all, these are the actual doctors that work with us side by side. They're the ones that see us at night, on weekends and holidays, in the ICU, in the emergency department, waiting around at 10 or 12 o'clock at night for our add-on case to start. They know what we do, and they know our contribution, and they fully support the title change of podiatrist to podiatric physician. So we kindly ask you to once again vote in favor of House Bill 790. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Doctor. And
Thank you,
Mr.
Doctor.
Block, did you want to add? Okay.
I just want to say thank you to the committee for your past support, and we ask for a favorable report. And it's a long day, so I will say thank you and good day.
Thank you very much. That concludes the speakers. I will open it up for questions from the committee. Delegate Krebs.
I got a question for Steve. I guess, Steve, you're representing MedChi. I mean, we've had this bill a bunch of years, and I've said in the past, I have no idea why it's such a big deal, but there's, in the testimony, there was a statement, and tell me if it's true or not. Evidently, MedChi had a letter they sent out to their membership last year, and it basically said, we killed a measure in the Senate that would have allowed podiatrists to call themselves physicians. This victory is particularly gratifying given that the federal government and 36 other states allow this to occur. I guess my question to you is, yes, 36 other states and the federal government refer to them as podiatric physicians. And I look at your testimony, you say people are confused. I guess they're confused in the other 36 states. But why is this such a victory for MedChi when there's so many big issues out there? What is I just can't understand the opposition to it other than it's a victory. But just help me to understand the passion you have coming back here every year fighting this thing.
Madam Chair, Steve Weiss signed up for written testimony. I believe he's left the room.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought he was on. It must have been from another. I'm sorry he's not there. Okay, but hopefully he'll hear my question. I thought I saw him on there. He was on the bill before. That's
Perhaps
just a
subcommittee.
Thank you. We'll ask him then. Thank you.
Right.
I can talk to
Any
you
other-
offline, Sue, if you want to know.
Delegate Hill, did you?
I was just
No.
telling Delegate Krebs I'd be happy to speak with her offline.
Okay, all right, thank you. Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, that concludes the hearing on House Bill 790 and the work before us today. I want to thank everybody for their time and testimony today. This committee will be having bill hearings tomorrow at 1:30, and we will see you all in our Brady Bunch squares tomorrow.